On Raglan Road on an autumn day, I saw her first and knew that her dark hair would weave a snare that I would one day rue. I saw the danger, yet I walked along the enchanted way, and I said, let grief be a falling leaf at the dawning of the day.
Tell me a little bit about, how you got involved in sculpting in the first place.
Yeah, I suppose most people who get involved in the arts come through some sort of art education, usually in colleges of art all over. I didn't go that route. I went the route of serving my time as an apprentice to the metalwork trade.
Right,
so
like
when I
John.
was 16 years of age, like John, yeah, coincidentally. So when I was 16, I left school and went to work in engineering works for about 5 years. And while I was there serving my time, most of the work we were doing was standard gates, railings, metal staircases, spirals, all that kind of stuff. But occasionally we'd get an artist in. Someone would come in to want something made that wasn't like we were doing every day. And one of the artists who came in very early on, and I was very young, was Imogen Stewart. She was doing a big job for a church and she wanted a steel cross made. So I was involved in making that steel cross. And I began to get interested in it because the other stuff was just so boring.
Yes.
And I began to get interested in the possibility of making art with sculpture. So that was my introduction to sculpture. When I finished serving my time, I decided I would like to get into art. Not so much as an artist myself, that happened later, but the business of making art in metal. So there wasn't really much happening in Ireland in that regard at the time. So I went to London. And I worked in a foundry in London for about 5 years. And that's really where I got immersed in sculpture and art, because in that foundry, they were a very important foundry in London, and we were doing work for Henry Moore, all the big English artists, Barbara Hepworth, all those people brought their work there to have it cast. So while I was there, I met John Bean.
Oh.
Because there wasn't a foundry here, there was a small foundry here being run by a man called Werner Schurman, who was married to Gerda Frommel, a sculptor, and they had a small little foundry in Wicklow up in Enniskerry. But he didn't really want to cast work for other people. He wanted to do his own work and his wife's work. But he used to do odd little pieces for Eddie Delaney and people like that. So there really wasn't what you call a commercial art foundry where people could come in and get their work made. That's why John was in London. He had brought some wax bulls over to that foundry in London to have them cast, because he was having his first sculpture exhibition in Dublin and he needed about 12 of these bulls cast. And that's where I first met John in London there, and we discussed the idea. I was thinking of coming home at that stage. He said, well look, when you're coming back, look me up in Dublin, we'll have a chat and we'll see can we do something about maybe, I was very interested in getting a foundry started because I had the skills. So John was great. When I come back, I looked him up. He was getting very well known at that stage, and he had contacts, and we managed to get an Arts Council grant. That was the first foundry I worked in Ireland. It was called Dublin Art Foundry. Myself and John worked there.
And where was that located?
It was in Pearse Street, and down near the docks, down in the South Docks in Pearse Street. So I worked there for about 12 years. John was there for about 6-7 years. Decided he'd go and live in Galway. So John was leaving Dublin.
Right.
So I worked on in Dublin Art Foundry, and by that stage, artists had really begun to come in, like artists like Imogen, Oisin Kelly, really good artists who were here began to work in bronze because the facilities were there.
Right.
Up to that they were working stone and wood and anything else.
And what about the Percent for Art scheme? I think that really made sculpture explode.
That's one of the reasons this place here is called Cast. After working for that length of time in Dublin Art Foundry and John had left, I kind of began to get very interested in my own work at that stage, and I was trying to kind of divide my time between looking after all the other artists' work and working very hard at all that, and beginning to want to make my own work in a meaningful way, not just the odd little piece at the weekend. So there was a bit of a dilemma approaching. So I decided there were other people working in Dublin Art Foundry, which is subsequently gone now. Didn't run it for very long after that. I got involved with Colin Brennan, who was a sculptor, and Colin was a very good sculptor in wood and metal, so he came on board, but he also had a background in finance, which I didn't. So we started Cast Limited, which is this foundry here, and almost at the same time I was very involved with the Sculptor Society, one of the founding members of the Sculptor Society, and we were lobbying the Arts Council and various others to introduce some sort of scheme to assist people to make their work bigger. So out of those discussions and that lobbying by the Sculptor Society came the 1% for Art scheme. And that changed everything, you know. It meant that when a public building or a project, it didn't matter what it was, a school was being built, 1% of the budget for that building was given to art. So all of a sudden you had competitions for sculptures all over the place, and sculptors began to get very busy, and so did we. So we worked away, we built up this foundry, and we became very successful in terms of the number of artists who were coming here and who continue to come here actually, and the scale of the work. So we had to move premises from where we were in Church Street. We had a small little foundry in Church Street after I left Dublin Art Foundry and started Cast Limited. And most of the artists who worked in Dublin Art Foundry came with me to that small studio. But very quickly we decided it wasn't big enough, so we bought this old factory which is here, and we just put in lifting equipment and big gates and all of that business. So we were able to produce very large sculptures here, and that was all part of that percentage for art scheme, which was really a very exciting time for sculptors, you know. 90% of the work we do here is a straightforward foundry operation. And that means a sculptor works in their studio in a whole variety of materials. It can be clay, plaster, plastic, wood, stone, whatever. And if they require that piece to be made in bronze, that's where we come in. They bring that piece in here. Or if it's a very large piece, they can work it in their studio, and we go out there and make our molds in their studio. But most of the pieces come in here. The first thing we do is we make a silicone rubber mold of that piece, usually in 2 sections, front and back. And from that silicone, when you take that silicone mold away from the piece, it's got the negative shape of the sculpture in it. We paint wax into that, we put it together, we slosh it around like an Easter egg, and then we take the mold away, and you now have a positive in wax, which is an exact replica of the piece that was originally sent in. Let's say it was a clay portrait head come in here in clay. We make an exact wax copy of that portrait head for casting. When the artist comes in and looks at that wax and is happy with it, makes additions or alterations, we then put that into what you saw up there in the foundry, which is called a ceramic shell mold. We build that mold around the wax. That allows us to put that ceramic shell mold into a furnace, melt out all the wax, and that leaves the shape inside the ceramic shell, and we fill that shape with bronze. It's called the lost wax process. The reason being, the wax is all melted out, it's lost, it's burned away, and the shell is filled with bronze. You then have a bronze casting. So you've gone from the clay original to the wax positive to the empty shell and the bronze casting. When the bronze casting is made, we clean it all off. The guys who do all the metal work here do all the welding and finishing, and then it goes to the patination department here, or patination area. And usually at that stage the artist comes back in to work on the patination with Anna or who's ever doing the patination here, to get the kind of colour they're happy with, you know. And once that's done, then the job is finished.
I know this is a very unfair question, but what would your favourite piece be?
I can give you 2 answers to that question from the point of view of my own work. Right. The piece that I kind of am happiest about in terms of how it works is a piece that's on the sign. It was commissioned by the OPW. They commissioned me to make a sculpture for the new criminal courts building in Parkgate Street, and it's a figure of justice on the wall, life-size figure of justice, and that's on television every night at 6 o'clock, because when all the criminals and bankers are coming and going and being interviewed outside the court, they always shoot up to justice. And so there you are. I'm very pleased with that one in terms of how it just works in relation to the building. But a piece that would be closer to my heart and that I really was very happy to make was a piece of mine called Home, which is in Buckingham Street, and it's near the Fire Station Artist Studios, and it's a piece that commemorates all the people who died in the north inner city from drugs. Ah. And there were dozens of people, and they wanted to commemorate them, and they had a competition. I entered the competition, I won it, and I made a piece of sculpture that's there. So that's the one I'm kind of emotionally attached to. The other one is a very good job. And in terms of work that comes out of here, yes, I have favourite artists like everybody else. And some of those are extreme. Of course, one of my favourites would be John, and I admire and respect John from 2 points of view. One, his sheer ability to just keep going, working every day, every week, every year for so long, producing original works of art, in his own style. He's one of the only sculptors I know in this country who has just spent his whole life doing his own work, and that's to be admired. And secondly, he's a very good sculptor to work with. Because he understands the process so well, he knows how to work with it, and that makes our job easier but more enjoyable to work for. And there's an artist called Googie. He's a painter, well-known painter, but he does bowls, just simple bowls, and I love them for their simplicity. They're very minimal. Oisin Kelly was a favourite of mine, and gone now, died, but I loved Oisin's approach to sculpture. Again, very thoughtful, almost meditative in his approach to making sculpture. He didn't do an awful lot, but the ones he did were very, very good. And probably my all-time favourite was a lady who never did big work, only ever did small work, was Melanie Lebrocki, and she only died a couple of months ago. Louis Lebrocki's sister, and Melanie spent her life doing small little intimate bronzes, but I always thought they were beautifully felt and beautifully modelled and full of kind of almost as good as Giacometti's work. You know, if you look at a Giacometti sculpture, the surfaces are all kind of there, but the spirit in them is so good, what they mean and how they're observed and what the artist is saying. I think Melanie was as good as that. She was probably be my favourite. Yeah. Someone will ring up and say, I thought I was your favourite.
Tell me about your work in NCAD.
NCAD was great. It was Brian King who was head of sculpture there. He was casting some work for Brian at the time, but he became head of sculpture and fine art in NCAD. And he just asked me would I be interested in going in there to teach 1 day a week, because the kind of way NCAD had begun to move, it was becoming more involved in conceptual work, performance art, video art, installation art, but there was still a kind of requirement for some students who were interested in the other type of sculpture, which is the type of sculpture I'm involved in. So Brian was aware of that, so he asked me would I teach it, would I go in there 1 day a week and talk to these students and work with them, which I did. And I'd go in there, work with them on their projects and their ideas, and they'd come here and cast their work. I'd look after them here and tutor them while they were here. So some very successful artists went through NCAD and worked with me, people like Linda Brunker and other artists I can think of, Grace Weir, all went through NCAD, and I really enjoyed my time there. But I reached a stage where I was just so busy with the Foundry here, the teaching, I really wasn't getting any of my own work done. Although I was there teaching 1 day a week, I found myself continuing on during the week. I'd say to a student, drop up and see me on Wednesday and we'll see, you know, and it was also taking up a lot of space in my head, and I wanted to fill that space with my own work instead of other people's ideas. So I left. I decided, I explained all that to him in there. That was great. We left on very good terms, all very good friends. But I decided to really seriously try and put some time aside for doing my own work, you know.
And do any of the students come to have their work cast?
Oh, they do, yeah. Various artists come here, yeah. The primary one would be Linda Brunker. She became a very successful sculptor. And various other sculptors come back and still continue to bring their work here. Yeah.
The new cohort of students, they don't?
No, they don't. They've moved away from this kind of artwork, art practice, really into conceptual work.
So an awful lot about the law in relation to putting the statues on site.
Yes.
That is a very tricky aspect of your job, isn't it?
It is, and you've got to be very careful, and I'm always conscious of that when I'm talking to artists, particularly artists who are working, let's say, on their first public commission. What they've got to do is protect themselves while at the same time allowing the piece the freedom to be in public. You know, the most important thing there is for an artist is to complete the project, get sign off from the people who have commissioned it, be it a county council or a city council or a private individual. We usually ask them to get that done here, because the worst thing that can happen is the client doesn't see the piece of work. It goes out on site, they turn up the next day to see it and say, oh my God, we thought it was bigger, we thought it was smaller, we thought it was green, we thought it was blue, and there's a problem. Whereas if they come here with the artist when the piece is ready and everybody's happy with it, then we can bring it out and cite it. And the other thing then that we advise sculptors to do is, once that piece goes on, either if it's a private commission, it goes into the private space, or if it's a public commission, it goes out in public, the people who have commissioned it take ownership of it. It's theirs. It's no longer yours. The reason for that is, if it gets vandalised or interfered with, or something happens, paint gets thrown over or it gets broken or whatever, the artist is not responsible for the cost of repairing it. The commissioners take ownership of the piece once it's sighted. And that's very important for artists too. And we get a sign off on it ourselves as a foundry. We get the clients here and make sure they're happy. We ask if they want to bring engineers in or whoever. And once they agree that the piece is finished and happy, we just ask to sign off on it. It means they can't call us back in a month and say, we thought it was going to be twice the size, or we didn't think it was going to be that. Or
it's very important.
It's just common sense, really, but it's important, particularly for younger artists who haven't got the experience, you know. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some like Joe Butler, he does a lot of work that isn't really suitable for the public domain.
He's a lovely guy and a very good sculptor. One of the most original minds in terms of sculpture making that I've ever come across. He makes work every year for the RHA, and I always look forward to seeing it. One of the great things about my work here is that, like, next week someone's going to walk in here with something I've never seen before. It's going to be great, you know, and it's a wonderful job. I'm very lucky, you know. And we have a great team of people here. The people who work here are all, they're great craftspeople. First and foremost, they're craft people, but they're also sculptors in their own right. They understand what they're doing, and they understand what the artist is on about, you know, and that's one of the reasons I think this foundry works so well, that artists can trust artists. They feel more comfortable if they know that the people who are working that understand sculpture and know about it and are not going to just bang it together any old way, you know. So we have a good reputation for that kind of thing, you know.
On Grafton Street in November, we tripped lightly along the ledge of a deep ravine where can be seen the worst of passions pledged. The Queen of Hearts still baking tarts, and I not making hay. Well, I love too much, and by such is happiness thrown away.